Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of our TUC coverage with our Senior Deputy General Secretary, Tony Kearns. How you doing, Tony?
All right.
Yeah, good, mate. Good, very good. So another busy day. A bit of a weird one today because there's lots of big keynote speeches and there's a few breakout sessions, but we still had good CW coverage. We've got loads to talk about. Our guests come to you really for an initial overview today.
Yeah, busy day. I mean, the day started off a bit like I mentioned yesterday, where you get different unions coming to this Congress and putting in front of the delegates the sort of issues that they're facing, which gives us an insight into what the workers are facing. Disputes, challenges, attacks, cuts to terms and conditions, much similar to ours. And by example, the first debate of the day sort of focused on that with a motion from the Fire Brigade Union, which really was an issue of not just the conditions they work under in terms of health and safety, but also potential cuts coming down the line to the fire service, which of course affects the public and the fire service's ability to have fire engines, brigades on the ground responding to 999 calls is going to be severely limited if those cuts come, which of course puts in danger members of the public. And so it sort of gives you a flavour of that. We then went on to debate about it's the sort of little things. I mean, some of this will resonate with our members. Attacks, physical violence assaults on public-facing workers. We were hearing from USDOR and the attacks that they see on, if you want a better phrase, checkout staff and that type of stuff. But again, that will resonate with some of our members. We have engineers working open reach, postal workers delivering to the public, counter clerks who are facing the public on a day-to-day basis will see that type of use and that type of assault. And it's an understanding that these things go on elsewhere, right the way through to a debate about dignity for train drivers. And, it can sometimes be a bit of a laugh and joke, but the horrendous stories come from McQueen and Vaslef about train drivers, unable to use toilet facilities, and now that's affected them to the extent that one train driver was in such a state that he had to step out of his cab onto the line to relieve himself, and got killed by a train coming in the other direction. So you start to understand that what seem like small issues or might sound like small issues actually can become a matter of life and death for people in work. And this is why the trade union movement comes together to gain an understanding of that, to see what we can do to support those campaigns.
Thank you, Tony. We had a couple of big keynote speeches today. One from Paul Novak, who's the General Secretary of the TUC. We also had Ellie Reeves of the Labour Party addressing Congress. Any takeaways that you think people should be aware of from those speeches?
Yeah, I thought Paul's was a really decent speech, to be fair. I know we've got a motion down to sort of reform the TUC or to democratise the TUC, one of which is the election of the General Secretary every 5 years as opposed to life. But it's not a direct attack on the current General Secretary, and I think he proved today why he is the General Secretary, to be honest with you. I think his speech where he said to the Labour government that this Trade Union Congress is not going to accept anything other than this workers' rights, the Employment Rights Bill in full. It's been through Parliament, it's gone to the law, there's been loads of amendments, but we're in the system. And Paul was quite strong on that. That has to be delivered in full. The other big takeaway from him was he wasn't afraid to call out that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. He listed those organisations, international organisations, that recognise it as a genocide, and he was quite clear that so do we.
We had a couple of, in between all this business, we had a couple of speakers today as well. We got loads throughout the week. I think tomorrow's a really busy day, isn't it, in his schedule. We had first up Rob Wotherspoon of our Postal and National Executive.
Yeah, I mean, there were two of the, if you like, big policy debates. A lot of unions put motions in and then they get grouped together, sometimes in a compensator, sometimes in one debate. And there was a big debate on the need for a better taxation system to fund the public services. And Rob was up on that. So you're right, Rob Wotherspoon, Bristol and District Amalgamated Branch, and I'm a member of our Postal Executive, made a number of very important points about the need to tax. It's about the need to tax well, pointing out how the two-child benefit cap puts more and more people into poverty, and those numbers are rising, and that has to be reversed. But actually also in how that fuels, if you like, the rise of the far right, because people are not seeing the change that they thought was going to be delivered by a Labour government, and as a result of which, people go, well, we want change, and our daily lives are getting worse, and they tend to look for somebody else. And part of that is a sort of an attraction for some of the, if you like, high-profile messages that the far right are putting out. But, Rob, we were also clear, and as was the TUC Congress, that the very thing that we're campaigning for, the very thing I mentioned Paul Novak is talking about, which is better rights for workers in work, which gives us, if you like, more power to represent our members and make greater gains for them. Reform MPs have consistently voted against that, and Reform MPs and other people on the right are all about an agenda of smashing the trade union movement and smashing workers' rights. There's nothing in moving to that part of the political spectrum that is going to do workers any favours whatsoever.
I thought Rob made an excellent speech. Another person made an excellent speech. At seemingly little notice at all was our head of education equality, Kate Hudson, as always, did a great job.
Yeah, she did. Kate was really good because there was a bit of confusion. We suddenly announced that the CW was supposed to move the motion, but nobody told us. But Kate, knowing the subject matter, which again was a sort of often overlooked aspect of the impact of the far right messaging, and that is the out and out misogyny that happens at that. About it makes online spaces for women much more dangerous. It makes makes women in the workplace feel much more vulnerable, and outside in society, increasing attacks on women. And Kate was really strong on that, moving a motion on behalf of the TUC Workers Committee in the name Women's Committee, in the name of the CWU. That everybody sees the far right on the street. It's not just about flags and their racist agenda. There's a deeply disturbing narrative being pushed by the far right. For want of a better phrase, as one delegate said, that a women's place is in the home and nowhere else. It's if like an old style patriarchic approach to the role of women in society. And as a trade union, long-standing champion of equality, but these are our members. And our members deserve equal rights in society and equal status and to be treated equally with respect. And that's not what the right-wing reform agenda is about. And Kate was quite strong on that, to be fair.
Yeah, she was brilliant. Over the years, when we've done these roundups, we've talked loads of time to members about importance of the workplace, but also what we do outside the workplace, what we do politically, what we do sort of campaigning for a better world of work. We also do lots of stuff in the community, and sometimes if a situation is just not right, we step in. The Truth About Zane campaign, I know yourself, Dave, Luke Elgar, and our executive have been really heavily involved, and that was a good debate as well today, wasn't it?
Yeah, again led by the Fire Brigade Union. The technical reason why it was the Fire Brigade Union, Zane Langbola in 2014, a 7-year-old kid, and in his house in Surrey, there was a flood, and the flood came up through the house, and little did anybody know that it was on an old, there were chemicals in the ground, shouldn't have been built on there, and as a result of which he died from chemical poisoning. And what the Fire Brigade, you're right, we've long since been, almost at the outset of the launch of the campaign, we've been a big supporter of that campaign. That that can't happen again, and we're pushing for legislation, Zane's Law, which is what the Fire Brigade Union motion was about, because they were the first responders, as it's known, on the scene, and they knew straight away, and they worked out straight away what was going on, and it's sort of like they never want to be dealing with that type of stuff again, and there needs to be legislation to hold people to account. That building houses where that is a real risk has got to stop. You can't put people's lives. This was at the time 11 years ago, 7-year-old kid. And his mother and father were in the visitors section today, and his father had pointed out that he would have been starting university next week. Given his age, but all that's been taken away from him. For reasons that could easily have been dealt with, and so the campaign for Zane's Law, as it's known, to make sure that those situations don't happen again, we fully supported, and as did the Congress. It was unanimous.
Thank you. It was a great debate. We're talking now, this might go out a little bit later, but we're talking ahead of our fringe this evening. We've got a fringe on sectorial collective bargaining and reform, or as you say, democratising of the TUC. A little bit of a flavour from members on what we think we might expect at our fringe?
Well, I think we're going to expect a really good turnout. We've got excellent speakers. The General Secretary, I've got to say that. Part of my job to say that. I'm paid to say that, yeah. We've got Eddie Dempson, General Secretary of the RMT. They've got their own disputes going on this week in London Underground. Being parochial, it's been London-centric there, but it is, which is about a lot about like health and safety and the sort of shifts that those people work on. And we've got Joe Grady of the UCU, the college union, who's also speaking, who are also launching industrial action on terms and conditions. And this is about like bringing delegates to come in here in a different environment, because on the speeches on the floor of conference, the movement gets 5 minutes, a couple of people get into debate, 3 minutes each, and there's no questions from if you like, ordinary delegates. The idea of having a fringe meeting like this is to take the way that we think needs to be done, as we outlined yesterday on sectoral bargaining, and ending the race to the bottom on terms and conditions, and also about making the TUC more accountable and more democratic, which we think are always in the interests of workers and our members, is a different environment by holding a fringe meeting and getting decent speakers who can answer questions about how we, if you like, prosecute those campaigns for the betterment of our members and for all of the workers.
Thanks, Tony. So any sort of, I guess, end of day 2 reflections and looking forward to day 3 thoughts?
Yeah, end of day, it's one of those days that you always get at the TUC, which is just like, as I say, you go from underfunding in the fire service to train drivers not being able to take toilet breaks to online, if you like, misogyny, right the way through to, contamination of the water system that can lead to people's deaths, and a wide variety of subjects that the CW does its best. We had other speakers down in other debates, but because of the time factors, they weren't called into debate. So, the CW is down here to play its part and do its work. Again, tomorrow we've got a number of speakers. We've got 1 or 2 of our own motions and amendments that we've put in that are on the pad to be discussed, but we'll update on that tomorrow night. So now it's on to what I think will be a really well attended and quite lively fringe meeting about how we move our agendas forward.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks from both of us, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. We really do appreciate it, and we'll see you all tomorrow.